The senator from New Jersey.
Thank you for recognizing me. I truly appreciate that. But this gets me excited because this is the point that I want to illustrate. My colleague, far smarter than me on medical issues, I could not have passed organic chem at Stanford. I'm sure he passed it with flying colors. My colleague, who is truly one of my more favorite colleagues in this place because of how rational, pragmatic he is on approaching to real crises like this. This is what I'm begging. I'm hoping he will listen to me, and I'm begging this body to listen to me. We have had a fentanyl crisis in this country of monumental proportions. It is one of the greatest killers in America. Fentanyl and fentanyl analogs have literally been responsible for lowering the life expectancy for Americans. It is one of the greatest crises we have seen to human life in America in my lifetime. And there is so much data-driven evidence, evidence-based answers to this, of how we can approach this crisis. But yet the only bill that we seem to do is a bill that does what we've already done on a temporary basis. I support class-wide scheduling for fentanyl analogs. But here we have this bill, the HALT bill, that my colleague pointed out did pass in a bipartisan way and now is in the Judiciary Committee. The reason why I'm down here is not to drag my dear friend down here because he is a busy man, and I wanted to come over to him before this conversation started to apologize, but I needed to make this point on the floor in this kind of standoff. He is asking us to pass the HALT bill, which would give class-wide scheduling to fentanyl analogs, which we have already done for years. It has been temporarily scheduled. And what has happened to opioid deaths in America? When we have used this that law enforcement has called for, schedule it, give us these tools. Well, we've had these tools. And deaths in the presiding officer's state, deaths in my colleague's state, death in my state has continued to go up. Now here's the beauty of the conversation we're having and why we should be passing the temporary one to let us go back to work. And I know this because I know his heart, I know your heart. There are evidence-based bipartisan amendments to that HALT Act that are widely supported. My colleague's partner senator from his state in committee said, I don't understand why we're not putting the test strips on this. Why? Because kids that are using fentanyl right now don't know that they're using this fentanyl analog. Kids in your state and my state, they think they're taking Adderall, and not realizing that this has those toxic things that can kill. So here we were in committee with a bipartisan test strip bill that my colleague's partner senator said this makes sense to me, and the one excuse they were using for not doing a bipartisan bill to give us more of a response than doing what we're already doing and wiping our hands and saying we did great things was saying we didn't have time because of this artificial deadline. So I'm down here to say, wait a minute, let's do the temporary extension and take time to do bipartisan bills. But don't take my word for it. Take the Republican witnesses that came to our hearing. We just had a painful hearing of law enforcement leaders, other Republican witnesses that told us the scourges of fentanyl that we all know. And those people all said, this can't be all Congress does. That the HALT bill cannot be our only response because the HALT bill permanently schedules what we have already scheduled temporarily. I believe in the 99 members here that know that our response to this crisis cannot be what we've already been doing for the last 5 years. When there are bipartisan bills that we could be putting on this bill to show America that we're not going to just puff ourselves up and make permanent something that was already done in a temporary way. Let me read some of this pleading from Republican witnesses. Republican witness Jamie Puerta, a courageous parent who lost his child to an overdose, testified, "It is imperative that we educate our children on the dangers of any kind of drug use due to the lethality that can come with any kind of experimentation or self-medication. We must have specific fentanyl education introduced to our schools as soon as possible, otherwise more children will die." That doesn't even cost money. We could be doing things through the Department of Education, supporting education campaigns, bipartisan support for that idea. Is it on the Holt bill? No. Let me go on. Republican witness Sheriff Don Barnes highlighted the successes of a multifaceted strategy to address both supply and demand for illicit drugs. These are the bullet points he said that we should do, imploring Congress, don't just do what you already done, do something more. Give law enforcement officers naloxone to reverse overdoses, education for 5th and 6th graders, ensuring a continuity of care and successful reintegration for people who are returning to the community from the scourge of these drugs. Witness after witness, from law enforcement to scientists to doctors, have offered up bipartisan supported ideas so that our response to one of the biggest scourges in our country isn't just to do what we've been doing for the last half decade or more. I've got bipartisan bills on the committee. My colleagues from Texas have bipartisan bills on the committee. And the only excuse that people said for us not to have more consideration, oh, well, the deadline is coming up in a few weeks for our temporary passage. When I realized we've passed temporary scheduling by unanimous consent before. It's not hard to do. I beg of my colleagues, I beg of my colleague that's here and others, we have a moving bill that has to go back to the House because we've already added a manager's package to it. And I promise you, if we add truly bipartisan things that give a more fulsome approach, a more comprehensive approach to stop our children from dying, it'll pass in the Republican-controlled House of Representatives because it was bipartisan here. I'm in agony over the deaths in New Jersey. I've met with parents who look at me and say, "What are you going to do?" Let me read you the words from one of these parents. Susan Austerman, a courageous mother who lost her son to an overdose. I beg of my colleagues, listen to what she said. "I urge you to stop crafting policies based on stigma, false narrative, political loyalty, and most of all, stop using our dead children to justify these failed approaches. Harsher penalties for drugs, like those for the Holt Fentanyl Act, do not deter drug use. They only push people into riskier behaviors, increase the likelihood that someone will die rather than call for help, and make our communities less safe. How many more Americans must die before we finally admit that the war on drugs was a failure?" I'm a former mayor. I oversaw a police department that had to answer to the calls with children dying on floors. They had these law enforcement tools. They would tell me more needs to be done. The Holt Fentanyl Act will get passed. Fentanyl analogs will never again be unscheduled in our country. That's not the challenge right now to save lives. The challenge to save lives in America right now is, what are we going to do more than that's being done right now? Fentanyl analogs are scheduled right now. And if the only thing we can do, the only bill that's moving through here is just doing what we've been doing, shame on us. I'm asking this body to give time, extend the temporary scheduling so that we can work in a bipartisan fashion, so that Senator Kennedy, who said, I want more time to look at this seems rational, this seems logical, seems like something we should do, that when bipartisan senators step up like that and say, I want to work with the man or the woman across the aisle, that we have the time to do it. So God, I'm sorry that my friend, who is truly a great American leader and one of the smarter people in here, I'm sorry that he objected to my bill, but I will stand up in our committee meeting on Thursday and make this same plea that we don't just pass the Halt Fentanyl Act, that we actually put things on it that aren't partisan ideas, that are the ones that law enforcement's calling for, that are the ones scientists are calling for, that are the ones doctors are calling for, bipartisan bills that, dear God, the parents of dead children are calling for us to step up and do more than the same old thing we've been doing around the war on drugs since I was a kid myself. With that, I object.